like to talk really specifically about an area which has been a big focus of mine for the last few years, which has been around virtual money and virtual assets. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is underpinned by technology, in particular blockchain or distributed ledger technology, which many of you have heard about. But I really want to talk about this particular application in the virtual money and virtual asset space. And I think that it is quite interesting because when we think about what blockchain is good for, really I think there's two key use cases where it really sort of comes into its own. And I'm certainly not an advocate to say, blockchain is a solution for, all of the world's woes. But I think if we are looking at what sort of use cases can be very appropriate for this technology, I think we're really looking at two things. One, it offers new ways of working together, and that's very interesting because of its very decentralized nature. It really offers ways of working together which we're perhaps not particularly used to, a very decentralized, no individual person or intermediary who's responsible for the system as a whole, but all of us rather working together truly as collaboration. And the second thing that's very good for is giving us exclusive control of digital assets, and that might be a digital representation of a real world asset like real estate or money, which I'll talk predominantly about. But it might also be a digital it might be a native digital asset, for example, like digital art. And I'm sure some of you have seen some of the headlines recently about the huge valuations we've seen of pure native digital art, which can actually be traced using digital technology and open up new opportunities in terms of rewards for original artists through the life cycle of the piece of art, which is not something that we've seen in the past. But I think that when we think about virtual money or digital money, it's very, very interesting because it's really, I think, evolving in two ways. One is we have a more revolutionary approach, which is really the philosophical underpinnings of Bitcoin. Perhaps not Bitcoin as we see it used mostly today, but really how it was originally conceived. And we have to walk back there to, really the global financial crisis and this impression that, and perhaps reality that the system, as it were, was not really working for all of us. And the financial system in particular was deeply imbalanced, and that we saw a lot of regular people who were having to now bail out through the tax system, through the taxes that were collected, bail out very large financial institutions who had undertaken very risky financial services and products. And it was really in that environment that we saw this new approach to Bitcoin, which offered a decentralized way of removing the financial intermediary, removing financial institutions, and allowing us to really transact on a peer-to-peer direct basis without needing a bank to go through to check that, when I wanted to send one Bitcoin or €1 from myself to Dominic or £1, that, the system itself would be able to confirm whether I did indeed have that money in my account to be able to send, rather than relying on a financial institution to do so. So we have that sort of approach to digital money, which has really kind of evolved a huge amount since 2009. Over the last 12 years, we've seen Bitcoin and a number of alternative coins to Bitcoin actually be developed since then. But then we also have, if we think about the world of digital money, a sort of a more incremental approach that was being driven more by governments. And I'm talking there particularly around this idea of central bank digital currencies that we're seeing come to the fore, which is a digital version of the currencies, the fiat currencies that we all know and use, on a day-to-day basis today. And that incremental approach, that change is really being driven, I think, by a couple of things. One, there's no doubt it's being driven by financial sector innovation. Although the possibilities for government-backed digital currencies have been around for a very long time, what really drove, I think, a more close inspection of the opportunities in this space was the Facebook-led project Libra or Diem, which really allowed us to see digital currency potentially evolving within, the Facebook ecosystem and that of its partners, to allow people to really transact using a type of private money, which in a sense is in fact no different in some ways to the money that you and I use on a daily basis. Because really what we really see today is that although our deposits in banks are fully backed by central bank reserve, in fact, what we use for day-to-day transaction is already a form of private money. It's private money which is developed by retail commercial banks. So what we saw here is an opportunity of some of these new large tech players moving into the financial space and allowing people to operate, for example, to exist fully within the Facebook world using a Facebook type of money, including for those entities to gain all of the information regarding, how you actually conduct your financial transactions, who are you spending money on, what are you buying for, or et cetera, et cetera. I think the second big driver that we saw for public sector innovation in the digital money space was the pandemic. Huge shift in spending patterns through the pandemic, in particular the shift away from cash towards electronic money. And obviously to date, that's been using traditional forms of electronic money, credit cards and debit cards and so forth. But that was certainly a driver to see we are more than ever living our lives online. And I think increasingly, there is less and less distinction between our online lives and our offline lives, our real life. And I think that idea that your day-to-day life is your real life and your online life is something else, I think that distinction is really disappearing, and we're seeing greater integration in there. And that's certainly true when it comes to payments, the payment systems as well. I think the third reason we're really seeing this really closer inspection of this new form of digital money is relating to some of the globalization trends that we've seen over the last 20 years or so, where we have seen payment systems not really keep pace with other innovations that we see. So, for example, cross-border payments remains a significant issue in terms of their cost and speed that really hasn't been addressed very well to date. Most central banks have a mandate focused on their national systems, and the question of sending money across borders is really left to the private sector to solve. But to date, those systems have been costly and inefficient. We know, for example, under the Sustainable Development Goals set by the UN, that we currently have a target to reach by 2030 of the cost of those remittances coming down to under 3%, but currently across the world, the global average is just under 7%. So it can be extremely expensive to send money from one country to another. Although 7% is the global average, in some corridors, you will see transaction costs amounting to about 20% of the transaction. So really, if you think about our ability to send money domestically, or even our ability to send information over the internet, we're able to do that instantaneously at very, very, very low cost, but we haven't seen that same revolution in the payment space. And that's why when people talk about blockchain, they often talk about it heralding the internet of value. So brewing on this internet of information that we've seen for the last 20 or so years, shifting to this internet of value. And that's to do with this idea I mentioned at the outset, that this technology allows for the first time the exclusive control of digital assets. So rather than creating a PDF, and once you send a PDF from yourself to a colleague, you never know what happens to the document. They may alter it, they may send it on to 5, 10, 100 other people, and you never know its ultimate place in the world. With this technology, you're actually able to, for the first time, really track it through its lifestyle, as well as to track any amendments to it as well. And that's true whether it be a document or whether it be digital currency. So solving that problem that, if it was otherwise, you would not know unless there's an intermediary involved. If I had sent, €1 to Dominic and also €1 to Birgit as well. And I'm giving away that I'm actually Paris-based by my references to the euro, but you can just insert the pound there. So look, I think those are some of the changes and the reasons for those changes that we're seeing. But I guess one question is really why? What can you do with virtual money? Why is it so interesting? I think I like to think of it a little bit like the iPhone, in the sense that when iPhones were first developed, we thought, okay, well, now I can get my email when I'm walking around. I think we all thought that was an improvement in our lives. I'm not sure we think the same thing 10, 15 years later. But so it's kind of the way that we could use perhaps traditional services and bring them into a mobile format. But what I didn't really think about was all the new services that would be built on top that we didn't even know we needed, like being able to order a car to come and pick you up wherever you were, being able to geolocalize where your children are at any point in time, so on and so forth. So there are some innovations. I think that is true also that we'll see with virtual money, that will also expand. So at the moment, we're often talking about things that are just translating what we have today into digital format. So for example, I think about bond issuance. We're thinking about how to gain efficiencies through doing that using blockchain technology. But that's probably not really innovation. It's just transferring from one technology to a more efficient technology. But what is, I think, really innovative is the idea, for example, around programmable money. But to give you an example, if you think about if you're going to buy a car and you decide to buy it on financing, so a leasing arrangement for the car, and you need to make 12 payments over 12 months, and you decide to make the payments using Bitcoin. And the contract is also managed through a smart contract, which is a type of software program that you can build on top of blockchain technology. And so it's all going very well. First month passes by, you make the payment. Second month passes by, you make the payment. Third month, how you're actually struggling to make the payment and you miss the deadline for the payment is due. The next morning you get up, you go to your car to go to work, you put the key in the car to unlock it, and you realize that you can no longer access the vehicle because the smart contract has executed to say, if Caroline misses her payment that is due on this thing, then automatically we rescind the access to the vehicle until that payment is made. So these are some of the things, if we think about programmable money, that will be possible in a very automated sense to actually allow clearer execution of how we might like these transactions to pay out. So automating some of the contractual terms that we might already have. Programmable money has many other applications as well. So if you think about, you give some money to your children, but you don't want them buying sweets, or you don't want them buying alcohol with it. You don't want them to, by using it to gamble online. And you can put some limits about what establishments they can actually use that money in. So this idea of program money, having money that has rules built into it that can be set, whether it be by governments. We think about some of the payments that have been made through the COVID system, so support payments paid to individuals by governments. We know that those systems were not as efficient as they could have been. We know people didn't receive payments as quickly as they can, allowing them to actually access those payments. But also, for example, we also know that some of those payments were received and then saved. Now, that wasn't really the philosophy behind issuing of those payments. Governments wanted to see that money to go back into economies as a general rule and have that money be spent to keep the economy ticking over during the pandemic. So maybe you would have programmable money that if you didn't use it within 6 months would expire, for example, or you could only use it for certain purposes and so forth. So just to give you an example of where we might be going in this space, virtual assets is a related area using the same technology. And I think it's going to be a really explosive area. And I'll just finish here. Again, if we think about this idea that our virtual world and our real world physical world existence are going to meld more and more. So rather than say, for example, buying a piece of art that I can put on my wall here behind me, maybe instead I'm going to want to buy a piece of digital art that on my Animal Crossing home that I buy online. I'm going to put that piece of art on the window. And then when my friends come over, I meet them in the Animal Crossing game, they stay at home. And we think about this as being crazy, right? Like, it's not the same being in a game as being in real life. But you talk to, young people today, and you can meet your friends online in an online environment, whether it be, playing esports or playing a game like Animal Crossing. You invite them over to your house, and now they see in your Animal Crossing house the art that you bought on the wall. And that's really, I think, something that we're going to see more and more of, this emergence of virtual assets and a huge amount of potential there. So look, for me, the thing is, I think the technology is almost the easy part. I really think that for us as a society to think very, very clearly about what values we want the technology to actually imbue from the outset is incredibly critical. We're already learning in this second wave of the internet, things that we've seen happen, whether it be kind of the walled gardens approach or network effects, which allowed, huge monopolies to develop in certain sectors. Think about, what do we want technology to actually deliver for us rather than be driven by the technology itself.